off the camera a little bit, or should I slide over some? Because I'm just looking at myself on screen up there.
Oh, because it's just on his camera.
Oh, okay. All right, cool.
You are listening to the Race 17104 Worldwide Community Radio.
Welcome to Did You Know? Podcast, your host, Richard Utley, dedicated to the African American viewers. The program is aimed to celebrate African American culture and deal with the real and relevant topics that impact the everyday lives of the African American community through frank and insightful dialogue with local and national influencers. Every day, there is another horrible, discouraging news story, directly or indirectly, impacting African Americans. But we need to look at the shining stars in the galaxy of Black America. It is time to tell our story.
Well, good evening to another Did You Know? Well, we down to the final count on this election. What can I say about it? I can say a lot of things about it, but a couple things I'm going to say. Hopefully all of you have already voted, and if you haven't, you got a little time to go. So you got almost an hour and a half to still get to the polls. And some of you are still undecided. Let's remember that other black people before you, in too many cases, died, that you might have the right to vote. Let's remember that it took a passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, guaranteeing and protecting our rights to vote. That people were beaten and killed to stop us from voting. That in this century, the United States Supreme Court struck down the key provisions of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. That since 2020 we have seen a number of states try to institute voter ID requirements and many other issues. And you still don't know if you want to vote. You don't know if you want to cast your vote. Remember that you got to have some skin in the game. I always say that. You know, my attitude is, and I realize this now, part of the problem is, and I have a guest on that we're going to talk about it, a lot of you don't know your history. I talk to people all the time. You don't know who your trailblazers are. You don't know who did the fighting for you. You know, I have to ask myself sometimes, where do you get your news from? Who told you this and who told you that? And so I've been pondering this for the last few days, and especially today, because I've talked to a lot of people. And I have a lot of young people that tell me such things as, well, that was in the past. We need to move on from that. Or it doesn't affect me. It does affect you. One of the things that I did understand, and I understand better now than I've ever understood, was that I've always remembered growing up, especially in the Jewish faith, they always talked about the Holocaust. They wanted all of the young Jewish people to understand the Holocaust. One, they could understand it, but two, to make sure that it never happens again. But they have history. So I am going to tell you, we're going to have to start teaching our own history. We're going to have to teach our own history to make us much more understanding in terms of who we are. So I've decided, I've always brought up history in my program, but I've decided I'm going to become a history person to you. And when I say a history person, I'm just going to throw some names out there, and I want people to do the research on it. Because we don't know anything. And it bothers me. Because I think if we knew a lot more, I think we'd understand the system, we'd understand how the system works, and we'd be better prepared for it. So before I bring my guest on, I'm just going to say a couple things. So what's my history lesson today? The Tulsa Race Massacre. Some of you know who it is, some of you know about it, some of you don't. Do the research. Find out what it is. What was it about it? I want you to do some history on John Brown, Harper's Ferry. Half of you probably don't know, but you can do some research and teach your kids about these people. 1887, the U.S. Supreme Court declared the Civil Rights Act of 1885 unconstitutional. That affected you, but you may not know it affected you. A lot of us think that where we are now, that nobody paved the way. Somebody not only paved the way for it, but we owe the responsibility to reach back and pull somebody else up. So I'm going to say Shirley Chisholm. Some of you may know who she is, some of you may not. Those of you know, maybe we should share that with other people and tell them who Shirley Chisholm is. Maybe we should tell them who James Clyburn is. Maybe we should tell them who Daisy Bates is. The reason I came to this conclusion today is because I've just been talking to so many people and they just don't understand. Now you tell me that you don't like government this way, you don't like government that way, but yet you're on Social Security and maybe one group said they're going to cut it and one group said they're not going to cut it, so you decide you ain't going to vote for nobody, but yet it affects you. But it affects you. We have to learn to stand up to the plate and be accountable for our actions. I keep telling you, you keep waiting on that horse to ride through the community and set you free. It's not ever going to happen. We owe ourselves a responsibility to teach ourselves some things. I mean, I mean that's the way I look at it. I'm just confused, ladies and gentlemen. Even with the whole, you know, some people won't vote their interests. And I'm going to leave you with this tonight because I really know that the election's close and I don't know who's going to win. But I want each of you to look in the mirror. And I want you to say to yourself, regardless, did I vote my vested interest? That's all I'm going to say. Look in the mirror and say, did I vote my vested interest? And if you did, I commend you. If you didn't, you need to rethink about maybe next time I need to vote my vested interest, but look out for myself, but look out for my family, and look out for my community. So I know all of you are really running to the polls and making sure everybody gets to the polls to vote. Please, you got till 8 o'clock. There's no excuse. There's no excuse. Because some of you say your vote don't count. Well, it does count. And I can look at you in this camera and say, I'm not really worried about me, ladies and gentlemen. I'm worried about the group behind me and behind me and behind me. That's who I'm looking out for. And those of us as my age, we should look at that because we got to look back for them. And we all have a responsibility to support one another and to support our community. Because if we don't look out for ourselves, then shame on you and shame on me. That's all I'm going to talk about the election tonight. I don't know when we're going to know who wins. But hopefully you did everything that you could to make sure that the one that you wanted to win has the greatest opportunity to win. And hopefully tonight all of you know basically me, and you all know that I'm a Democrat, and I've never tried not to say I wasn't a Democrat, because most of you all know that I'm that. So I'm hoping, some of you praying, that maybe we might make history. And I hope if we make history, you were one of them that helped us make history. So, what are we going to talk about tonight? Well, I got about one of my buddies on, Brother Jobe there. You know, we're going to just have a conversation about some things, and I'm trying to get his perspective as well as my perspective tonight, because the day's a heavy day. And since the day's a heavy day, it might be tomorrow too, I figured that what we need to do is to lighten it up a little bit. So we're not going to be heavy, but we'll lighten it up. We're going heavy, but we're not going to be. So, Jobe, would you please tell my audience who you are? I've known you, and tell them who you are and where you came from.
Okay.
There you go.
Will do. My name is Jobe Beckham. I moved to Harrisburg about 13 years ago from Atlanta, Georgia. Born and raised there. Moved up here for my career. I'm in cybersecurity. I'm a director at Verizon. I also teach cybersecurity at Messiah University. So that's basically kind of, in a nutshell, kind of what I do and kind of what my background is.
But you told me we're going to talk about cybersecurity, and then after we talk about cybersecurity a little bit, then we're just going to talk about some things general in life.
Okay.
What do you see right now? Cybersecurity has become so discerning. Every time somebody turns around now, I get letters. I'm sure everybody here gets letters that something was compromised. The other day I got something that Ticketmaster was compromised.
Yep.
Then I got something that somebody else was compromised. How does that happen all the time? It's become like a regular now.
It's a regular thing, yeah. It's a regular occurrence, and it's not going to stop, especially with AI threats becoming more prevalent. So the threats are becoming more sophisticated. So at the end of the day, why these breaches happen so much is that it's sensitive information that they want. Social security numbers, names, addresses, telephone numbers, basically to be able to identification for who these individuals are. So if you get that information, this important PII is personal identifying information, or PHI, personal healthcare information, PHI. That information they want it, it's being sold at an alarming rate on the black market, on the dark web, and people want that information, and they want to use it and leverage to either create their own accounts, use that information to create and steal your identity. So that's why it's going to constantly continue to go on. And the reason I bring up AI is because AI is a tool that's being leveraged to help use these data breaches and to steal your information.
Could you explain AI and
Yep.
what it is, and give us the whole particulars about it?
Yeah. AI is artificial intelligence, and basically how it's being used is that basically it's a machine. It's called LLM, large level machines, machine learning. And so what do? You use AI to kind of autonomously create these threats. And if you can create these threats kind of on the back end, have a machine do it for you, then obviously then it becomes a numbers game, because now instead of reaching out to hundreds or thousands of individuals, now you're reaching out to millions of people trying to steal and get their information. So AI is being used as a vessel, as a tool to help threat actors get your information.
Could you explain a little bit? I mean, we hear the word AI. Could you even be going a little bit more depth to explain to the audience the whole concept of AI and why we see all these digital things and creating people's pictures and things like that? I think my audience need to kind of really find out what AI is about.
Yeah. So AI, again, it is a tool that's being used, and the reason why everybody's in a race to use AI, and these companies and these organizations, they want to leverage it, is because what it does is it saves them money. It does the job or the actions of what many people can do. So if I can task you or an individual to do a certain job, AI might be able to do that same job maybe for like 2 or 3 individuals or multiple individuals. So AI in essence is actually saving money and making things at the end of the day more efficient and being more streamlined. So it's a technology that's being leveraged, and AI is basically what it is it's information that's being fed. So AI is only as good as the information that is being fed. So the question is, who's feeding it its information to leverage it? So once you understand who's feeding it that information, then you have to understand how is this information being used. So if it's information, let's go back to the threat actor. If there's information that the threat actor is feeding it and it's used to obviously steal our information, then obviously that threat actor is feeding it information in order to leverage and compromise citizens and people's information to steal it. So the more you feed it, the more sophisticated it get, and eventually over time it becomes autonomous and it starts to act on its own.
So we should be very wary of that, would you say?
Well, I wouldn't say worry, but you need to have an understanding of what AI is and how it can definitely be used moving forward. Because I don't think AI is going away. I think it's something that we're moving towards to as opposed to going away from it. And organizations and a lot of people and a lot of powerful people are actually going to use this technology moving forward. So if you understand how it works and what it can do, then you won't be so fearful of it. You'll just have an understanding of it as a new technology that's going to continue to evolve.
Okay. So you're saying that's why people talk about we should be concerned about it because it's going to take some people's jobs.
Well, I'm not going to necessarily say it's going to take some people's jobs. I mean, I think people shouldn't be, wake up every day and say, oh, AI is going to take my job in the future. That shouldn't be the focus. The focus should be is like, how is AI and how is it going to make my life, or how am I going to use it in my day-to-day life? Or how is my organization or my company going to use AI? Because no matter how much technology it starts to evolve, you can't remove the human element of it. The human element, the people are always going to have to be involved with technology. You won't be able to remove the human element at all. It's just going to be used as another tool that's going to be used like, quantum computing and so forth, like the cloud. It's just going to be like a computer or it's a cell phone. It's just technology that's continuing to evolve, and we're just using it in what we do in our day-to-day life. So I don't think you need to be fearful of taking your job, when it can be used as a tool to help you do your job.
Well, I would admit that I do have AI on my phone.
Well, most people do, yeah.
And I can go in and I can say, I want to give a speech on something. Mm-hmm. And I will give it the topic. And it will punch out exactly some of the things that I could say.
Right. Some of the things, you hit it. Some of the things you just said. But at the end of the day, you being the human element involved in that, even you have to edit that and decide what you want to use from what it spit out. So again, it is just nothing more than a tool that you're using, and then you're taking what you wanted. You still have to tweak and create it and massage it to what you want it to say, but you use it as a tool to help you get started. So like I said, that's exactly the way I describe it, and that's exactly the way you use it. You use it as a tool that you can use moving forward, and that technology that's what it's pretty much there for.
Why is it there's a big issue now since we're talking?
Mm-hmm.
I noticed on a lot of these campaign ads, and they say that the other foreign governments have locked into creating these messages through AI on us. How come it's been so easy to do?
Yeah, so one element of that is misinformation, and a lot of that is being done via AI, actually. So misinformation is used from, other countries, organizations, parties and so forth that leverage this technology to actually disseminate misinformation. During campaign season, which we're in right now, there are ads that people create to kind of create discourse and division amongst people, and they just want to continue to keep a theme going. And this isn't the first time it's happened. This has been going on since 2016, 2020, 2024 election. So again, AI is being used as a tool to kind of disseminate this misinformation, because remember, it is a tool. You can do it use it for good or bad. So if you can use it for something good, as opposed to when you said you tell it what to do and you want to spit out a text or an email or something, it can also be used to do mischievous things and also in devious things, which it can be, which is where you have misinformation that's being disseminated by the use of AI, by threat actors and so forth, to actually come up with a certain outcome, with a certain fear inside groups and so forth. It's definitely a real thing, and it does happen. But again, if you educate yourself and know that these type of things happen, and I think that you said something in the start of your show, where are you getting your information from? So again, if you're just getting your information from a certain platform or place where a lot of this misinformation may take place, then maybe you are getting or feeding or repeating misinformation. So again, know your source of information, know how credible it is. And then also another thing I would tell people, when you do get information, you don't have to believe the first thing you read. You can also, check other sources and resources to kind of make sure what you're reading is actually valid and reasonable. Because of that, if it's good information, you won't find it on just one platform. You'll find it in multiple places to confirm it.
So when you say multiple platforms, what do you mean by platforms?
Platforms on Facebook, Instagram, a lot of these different places, TikTok. These platforms actually being used to kind of spread this misinformation. A lot of people use those platforms. I'm not trying to talk down about it, I'm just giving an example.
Sure.
A lot of people use these platforms for their information. And I'm not saying it's a bad place to get it, but what we do know, and it's documented, that sometimes misinformation is used and disseminated on these platforms.
I mean, the reason I'm asking you all that's because people hear the word AI and all that, and I'm glad you explained that part. Now the other part you just explained, these data breaches that everybody gets, it's just become.
It's normal. It's not a question of if, but when. Okay. Everybody's. I mean, there's probably no person of any significant age that has not had that data compromised. And what I mean compromised, meaning it has been exposed in a data breach. Now, it may not have been leveraged in a data breach, but it's been exposed.
Okay. And they are able to find that out. I just saw that Ticketmaster just had a data breach and somebody. And so.
And it probably give everybody, free credit monitoring and so forth. You could freeze your credit, some of the things you can do to kind of combat it. But like I said, if you're of any significant age, you have not received any notification via letter or email that says your data has been compromised. Pretty much everybody has got that email or that letter.
Yes, because Target, they all have.
Yeah, they all been compromised. We use a credit cards. Our PI is out there, and it's been compromised to some degree. And we've all got letters. We all had probably credit cards that we had to stop using because the bank may have froze it, stopped it, and then you're sending you another credit card. That's all part of this data breach and your information being compromised. So
would you say that's going to be the way of life?
Well, it is the way of life right now. That's as we know it. That is the way of life. Like I said, it's not a question of if, but when. And everybody, like I said, of any significant age, that's an adult. You've had your data compromised. Like I said, you may not have anybody steal your identity or take your social security number or anything like that, but your data has been exposed somewhere.
So you're saying it's out there somewhere?
It's out there somewhere, absolutely.
Okay. What else do you think that my audience should know about what we're talking about at the present moment?
Well, again, there are ways that you can kind of combat this. Something I mentioned earlier, a lot of people kind of freeze their credit. So that anytime you want to, if you're about to make a purchase, a house or a car or anything like that, you go to your creditor, you unfreeze it, then you actually make your purchase, then it freeze it again. Because that way no one can open up a line of credit, no one can leverage, anything in your name because it's frozen. And only you, the individual, can actually unfreeze it. So that's one thing people are doing. I actually think one thing that you should do is you should check your transactions every day, because a lot of times what happens is that when people if your credit card or any of your debit cards get compromised, there are a lot of dummy transactions that go first. You may see a transaction for like a penny, 2 cents, 5 cents, and so forth, just to see as a transaction would go through, and then that's when you start to see a large purchase after that. That's when you see like a $100 purchase, $200, because they're testing it to see if it's actually going to go through. But again, if you keep up with your transactions and see what your spending habits are, you can see, oh, this isn't normal. I didn't. Do I have a penny or a 5 cent transaction on my account? Call your bank. Maybe let me freeze this, or let me dispute that. Or if you see anything from, that's malicious, let's go ahead and work on this. So there are a lot of things you can do to kind of help be proactive in regards to it. And I will say that using debit cards sometimes puts you more of a risk because the thing about the difference between debit card and credit cards is that once a debit card money is spent, it's hard to get that money back from a financial institution because they view that as like liquid money that's gone. Whereas with a credit card, if you use credit card purchases via online or at the gas pump and so forth, that's not so much liquid money. That's kind of money that's like just used off of credit. You have a better chance of getting that money back or salvaging that expense as opposed to something like a debit card, because that means that money's gone, and 9 times out of 10 they have no way to really combat to say that wasn't you making that purchase. So one thing, definitely, if you have a credit card, I know some people don't, I understand that, try to leverage that as much as possible. And a lot of people now are just carrying more cash with them nowadays, to be honest with you. People actually going back to the old method of just leveraging more cash. And trying to limit their transactions of what they actually do via online or face-to-face online. People all the time go to restaurants now. So a lot of people are paying with cash.
Well, I will say 2 things. One, you told me that before about debit card and credit card, and I would admit to you, I heed your message. So I do use my debit card when I go into the bank at the institution itself. Right. But I do not go into stores or gas stations or anything and use my debit card. Mm-hmm. From what you said.
Well, yeah, that's
and I learned that from you. And the other thing I already have done, he brought up freeze your credit. You can freeze it, ladies and gentlemen, but make sure you know what your password to get back in.
Yeah.
Because the problem is you forgot you froze it. And then you go in to buy something.
Right, exactly.
And they say, I can't do it until you uninstall the credit card, uninstall it, and then you be like, oh, that's right. So I am aware of that, mm-hmm. because a couple of times I were looking at things, and the person said, we might have to run a credit check. Not mm-hmm. that I ended up doing it, but
right.
we want to run a credit check, and they can't run the credit check
because you froze the account.
Both of my all of them is frozen.
Yeah, it's frozen, yeah.
And the only reason it's frozen is because I had a mental lapse. I know that you get all these emails and you get these messages that tell you such and such about your account, such and such about your account. And like you say, and they make it seem like it's the institution itself. Mm-hmm. And you look at it and you say, oh my God, they just sent me this message, and it looks real.
Right. And
it looks real, and so you respond just before you thought about it. And that's what happened to me. Before I really thought about it, I responded. Right. And when I responded, but I was fortunate because it clicked.
Right.
It clicked right then, and as soon as it clicked, I know it sounds crazy, it clicked. And you know what I did? I jumped in my car, thank goodness it was in the middle of the afternoon, and went to the bank. I ran to the bank, I said, hey, I did, and they said, what? And they took the card.
Right.
Nobody had made a transaction because they had my number.
Right.
Credit. They made no transaction. And, of course, they gave me all this information. Like you said, in order to protect yourself, you can freeze. And then you can fill out some forms and send it all over. And,
right.
But because they say the chance of them finding where it came from,
right.
They didn't. So that's what happened. I just had a mental lapse.
No, I totally understand.
And I realize now one of the big groups is older people.
Yeah.
Because
they're the targets.
The older people are the targets.
They're big targets. They're big targets because a lot of times in the older elders, a lot of times they don't understand, scams or people, phishing attacks and so forth. Well, again, I just said AI, these attacks are getting more sophisticated, and it's a numbers game. So now when they could craft something themselves, maybe send it out to 1,000, but now when you use AI to craft these threats, you can send it out to millions. So again, if you can craft these messages and send it out to 1 million, and let's just say, for instance, out of that 2%, 10% of them are elderly people, more than 9 times out of 10, they're more applicable to click on something. And if you click on something, that's not necessarily always good. And then when they click on something, then what you've done, potentially, you've invited some type of malware or anything on your system, and now you have compromised your machine and your information. So that definitely happens. But one thing that I will go back to, circle back, you asked what can people do. One thing you can also do is do multi-factor authentication, and that is Basically, what it is, it's another layer of authentication on your whatever you're trying to do. Let's just say, for instance, you're trying to, look at your bank account. 9 times out of 10, people have it on their phone. They can just go in the app, pull up their accounts right there. Multi-factor authentication, what that means is that now what you would do, you would go on your phone, look at your app. Now it also give you another layer of authentication to say, all right, let me send a text message to your personal email or your cell phone, just so you can validate that this is indeed is you. And then you confirm it, then you move forward. So if another person, steals your phone or some type of, gets your account and they're able to log in via on the web, on the internet, they will need that another second layer of authentication to authenticate, and they may not have that if you have your personal phone. So having that multi-factor authentication is another thing, and that's a good thing you want to use as well.
Well, as we were talking earlier, these are the kinds of things that we are not aware of, and nobody talks about them. So it's good to have somebody like you on to even have us think about it.
Yeah.
I mean, because all the news they've been bringing AI up, and people been talking about it, and a lot of times people don't really know what it is.
Right.
And that's why I'm glad that you came on to talk about it. I want to move on to, there's a lot of people out there that have businesses.
Yeah.
And so what are some of the things that you think that is tips for people that have businesses but they need to be cyber safe?
Okay. Asset management is essential. Understand what are your assets, what are your most valuable assets, where are they, and who has access to it. You need to ask yourself those 3 questions for any type of organization. I mean, it could be a Fortune 5, or it could be a mom and pop, or sole anything. What are your assets? Identify what those are, who has access to it, and where do they sit inside your network. If you can identify those 3 things, then what you've done, you did asset management. Now the question is, how are you going to secure these assets? Are you going to have it separate on a particular network, or are you going to use multi-factor authentication around it? Are you going to encrypt it? Will you need a VPN to get inside these things? But first is identifying what those assets are. Then once you can do that and then know who has access to it and where is it, then you can start to build some controls around asset management.
So you're saying they need to also keep eye on the data?
Well, the data is your assets, whatever information you deem important. So I'll give you an example. So if you're a bank, part of your most valuable assets is your customers' information and their money, their accounts. So I'm pretty sure when you work at a financial institution, that information sits behind some type of security measure that is as easily accessible as like getting a HR document. That's that's not a valuable asset as opposed to customers' information and their account information. There are multiple controls in place that are securing that information, so they know where's this asset, how are we securing it, and where does it sit, and who has access to it. That's probably one of the more important things is that not only do I know what my assets are, who has access to it. So it's no different than having your own personal account. So view it as that. Like my own personal accounts, I have access to it. Or if you're married or in a relationship, I mean, does your spouse or your significant other have access to your accounts? You need to know that. Then if they have access to it, then how are they actually getting to your account? Are they using multi-factor authentication, or are they just able to log in single sign login to just get in? Those are things that are important. But the most important thing is asset management. What are your assets? How are you securing it? And who has access to it? Those are things. If you can answer those 3 things, then you can start to build a strategy about how you want to secure your assets. And any organization, no matter the size, can actually do that and implement that.
I see a lot of times people talk about with the data and having encryptions and things.
Mm-hmm.
What is that about? Because I hear it, but what does that mean?
So encryption, so a lot of times when you have, so let's just say for instance like a transaction takes place, regardless of whatever that is, there's a transaction from one place to another that needs to happen. So you can encrypt that data in rest where it sits there, then you can encrypt actually when it's in movement to get where it has to go. So you can either encrypt in transit or in rest or both. So a lot of times what happens, a lot of this data isn't encrypted. So a lot of times it sits on a particular network or on a database and it's not encrypted. So it's just literally sitting there in plain text. So go back to account information, username, password. Sometimes that information sits in plain text and it's not encrypted. So let's just say, for instance, a threat actor can get access to, particular accounts and so forth. If it's encrypted, it still does them no good because it's encrypted. But if it's not encrypted, now that I've kind of got inside the environment and it's unencrypted, now I can kind of see things in plain text.
Okay, and since we're talking about business cyber safe, I guess you're saying also that they should create backup plans and identify valuable areas.
So it depends on your type of business. Backups are always good. Obviously, if you're dealing with a virtual, system, or dealing with something on the cloud, or if you're dealing with something on prem, those kind of ideas come with their own cost analysis associated with it. Where something on a cloud can sometimes be used and be cheaper. So you can probably back that up. How often would you use these backups? But if it's on prem, sometimes they can run a little bit more expensive in the short term. Well, actually in the long term, because equipment is bought and you only buy equipment once, whereas costs are associated with the cloud continually seems to grow. So it depends on your strategy for any organization, but backups is something that should be talked about as part of a strategy, but it just depends on your business model.
Okay, but you're saying that businesses need to look at their computers and their information that you get, because a lot of these stores around, especially mom pop stores, they're trying to
Absolutely.
they're trying to do business,
Right.
but they have to do something to kind of safeguard their customers, right?
Exactly. You can come up with something that's, again, that goes back also to asset management. And again, so you can say, well, we have this data that we want to secure. And let's just say, for instance, we never back this data up. Where does that data sent? So if something ever happens to it, or it gets exposed, or it gets malware, it gets infected, where can we go back to find a good, clean copy of this data? Because if you get inside a database and the whole database is corrupted, then obviously you have no good data anywhere, which is where backups come into play. So if you back up every 24 hours, so let's just say, for instance, today, an organization gets breached on November 5th, but we back up every 24 hours, so at least we can always go back to November 4th. That's where we then have our known good data was last on November 4th, so we just roll back to that, even though everything from the 5th is corrupt.
Okay. I mean, a lot of times we don't understand those things, so I felt that I wanted you to give us some say. What would you tell my audience, or some of the other things that we just need to be aware of about cybersecurity, and then we're going to move on?
Yeah. So just for anybody out there, what are your most? I will just leave you with this: identify what your most valuable assets are, which most of us is going to be probably financially, it'd be our bank accounts or our business accounts, et cetera, et cetera. And then also find out what assets do we have that are valuable. So if you run a small shop, you have intellectual property, or you have customer data. That customer data is obviously important. How are you protecting that data? Where is this data going? So just understand what's important and how you're safeguarding it, and who also has access to it. So you just want to ask yourself those questions, and just come and actually have a checklist that they can have, that I can actually give to people. Ask yourself these certain questions, and then based off your response, then you actually go down the checklist and say, okay, am I using multi-factor authentication? Am I using single sign-on? And then if some of those answers are yes and no, then it moves you to another point of like, okay, this is what I need to do. This is what I can use as a free multi-factor authentication. And then you can kind of build out like a hybrid or a puzzle to say, now I've built myself a kind of business continuity plan, an asset management plan, and you can kind of implement that kind of on the fly.
Okay. How did you get into what you got into? And the reason I'm bringing this up is because this program is called Did You Know? And part of the concept of this program is to give people an exposure of some of the other things that other people do.
Mhm.
Because too often, a lot of us know and don't know any better. We, half the kids want to be basketball players, football players, or whatever, and a lot of them can't be that.
Right, I did.
But, so my point is, how did you get into what you got into, and what should people should do to try to get into some of the field that you're into, because that is the way things are going, I would think.
Yeah, cybersecurity field right now, they can't fill the jobs, to be quite honest with you. So it's in very high demand right now, and I think it's going to continue to be in high demand because, again, cybersecurity is also national security as well. It's just one way to view it. And actually, cybersecurity is probably one of the fastest growing fields in the world, actually, because there's not a place or no organization. Every organization needs cybersecurity. Everybody needs it. Everybody needs some type of security via cyber. And how I got into this field didn't even exist when I graduated from college. I graduated in 2000. The field just didn't exist. So this is a relatively new field. It's a young field, and it's continuing to evolve. So I started out in basically database management, basically just managing, laptops and computers, understanding how the back end, some of those things work, different languages like SQL, C++ at the time, Perl, HTML, a lot of those things I kind of got involved with. But basically it was all about managing databases. And then it went from there. Then I also got into networking. Then from there, it went off into e-discovery, which is electronic discovery of documents. Then it went into digital forensics. Then it spawned off into cybersecurity. So it was a gradual process of how I went up the ladder. But it all started with just understanding how computers works and managing them on the back end.
So what would you suggest some people should do to see if this is kind of where they want to go?
Yeah.
Or because nobody talks to them
Right.
about
No, well, no one talked to me either.
So now what would you, all right, nobody talk to you, but now you can talk to all. So what would you tell them?
No, I'll tell first have a curious mind. I mean, because to be in this field, you need to be curious. Because in this field, a lot of the answers you won't necessarily have. You have to go search and look for it, and do some research. So if you're curious by nature, automatically that gives you a head up on this field. And what I would also do, I would just say, take it upon yourself to actually learn a particular language. Like, I'm gonna just give you some. Python is a fascinating one to learn right now. So if you're curious about this field, look into Python. Kind of just learn it at a high level. Understand how to use Linux. I think Linux is a great tool to use as well. But if you have a curious nature about how computers work, what do they do, about the inner workings of them, I think it'd bode you well in the future, because you have to understand how computers work and what they do. But if you're just curious about how technology works, that's how you move forward. That's what bodes you well in the future.
Okay. Do you have any other suggestions on this?
I mean, I got a lot of different things. I mean, because the issue more than anything in this field is that how do you get your foot in the door? And I think that's really probably the hardest thing to do, because once you get in your foot in the door, you can navigate and start to get into the field and start to get some experience. So really the key is, I mean, or you could just take some free courses online, free educational courses, via Google or YouTube is a great place to learn, just to kind of build up some skills. So that's probably one of the best things to do. Just go to YouTube, go take some classes on Google, and just kind of learn, some cybersecurity courses. That's probably one of the best things you can do. Then once you get comfortable with that, even though you don't have any experience working in that field, then you have an understanding of like what you can do and how it works. So when you start getting out to the field and applying, and the next thing you can also do is network. Networking is the absolute best essential thing you can do, because networking is how you can get your foot in the door, and meeting other people that do what you want to do, or switch over to the fields. That's who can actually open up some doors for you, because now you put in some work. You actually been on YouTube, you took some classes. Now you just need to network, and so you can get your foot in the door. So once you do those things, then people will probably be prone to help you out, just because like, okay, this person has a work ethic that will actually do well moving forward in this company.
So that's how you developed from college, and you made that decision.
Absolutely.
because you were curious and you.
Well, I was always curious. That was my minor in school. My minor was computer information. I actually wanted to go in the law field, but yeah, computer information systems is what yeah.
Okay. All right, so let's talk about some other things. We got some few minutes here. I told my audience I wasn't going to be super heavy,
All right.
but my point is that we need to know these things because something that you and I had a conversations a few minutes ago before we came on the air, and we were saying that information is very important, but knowledge is very important, and you have to know. And I remember you saying sometimes people are put in situations, but they don't know no better.
Right, of course. I mean, there are a lot of times and I think everybody of any significant age has been in a situation where they just probably didn't know any better, and then once you knew, you're like, oh man, I didn't know that, but now you know. So when you know better, you do better. So so we have to be not so quick to, chastise and excoriate people for things if they do something wrong. It's more about let them know, educate them. Just say, hey, if you didn't know, then obviously let me just show you a better way to do this. Now, once you know and you still make those same mistakes, then that's a different discussion. But if you don't know because no one ever told you or showed you, then obviously people could be a little bit more empathetic and sympathize with you.
I think that's something that you just brought up, but I think that's something that's happening in the minority communities. Because what happens is, as you said, where do you get your information from? Where you get your influence from? I mean, I've had people on this program that talked about selling drugs or being incarcerated, and then I was reading lately, like all the towns, whether it's Harrisburg, Philly, Pittsburgh, or whatever, have gangs.
Yeah.
And they have these young gangs that 13 and 14, 15 years old, and you say, well, why? Because they say they remind them of a family. But they don't understand that if they fall into that trap at a very early age, it has a rippling effect all the way into their adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
So
I call it the spider web.
the spider web.
Because if you ever got caught in the spider web, it's easy to walk into, but it's hard to get off of it.
Okay. And you think that's some of the things that we should talk to our young people about?
Absolutely.
Do you think we talk to our young people enough?
Well, remember that communication is a two-way street. So someone has to obviously give you or, communicate something to you, but then communication also falls on the person receiving it. Mm-hmm. So so if someone's willing to give you some information or talk to you about something, but you're not willing to receive it, then that communication chain is broken. So if you give someone some information or talk to them and then they receive it, then that's a successful communication. So obviously, it's a two-way street. So it can't just be all on me giving you information. You have to be willing to get the information. And I think a lot of times, most of those transactions aren't received sometimes because a lot of people don't want to receive the information.
What do you think we should do to help the young people out in our neighborhoods? And the reason I'm asking you that because we got a job and we need to give them the tools to succeed, and we need to be positive with them, but they got to have some of the tools to have that, because they say it takes a village, and that's a very true statement. But the village is not necessarily what I knew the village to be, or what an older person might know what the village is to be. So I'm just curious from your standpoint, what are some of the things that we should do? And one of the reasons that I have an issue is because we don't do a good job of, or sometimes we're negative to young people. I tell people all the time, we got to tell our young people positive things. We got to tell them they can be all right or they can be something. Because I realize now, and maybe I'm wrong from my perspective, they ain't got a go-to person. That's a positive person. And you say they only go by what they know. Mm-hmm. And if they see survival one way, not understand that it could have repercussions another way. So what do you feel about that?
Well, I think the main thing you got to understand, we're in a different time right now.
Right.
So, kids, the young folks, I just say, the young folks' interests are all over the place, and so you can make a career pretty much out of anything nowadays if it's harnessed the right way. So just because, back, probably, 20 or 30 years ago, I mean, no one even talked about cybersecurity. What are you're securing what? No one even understood what that meant. But now, if a young person says, I want to do X, the key is identifying what that young person likes, what their interests are, and expose them to it. A lot of times what they like, we may shun it because that's not something we want to do, but that's something they have an interest in, because now you're talking about passion. And now once you have a passion, then you can follow that passion, and then you can also do something and be constructive because that's something they like. So just because you may not like their passion, they may say, I like to spray paint on houses and stuff. Okay, so obviously you like to paint. Let's harness that. Let's not use this to actually do something destructive. Let's give you a platform to where you can spray paint. So let's just, use this empty garage where you can express yourself, and then you never know, that person could turn out to be a fascinating artist or something. So it's harnessing their interests and their skills. So when they want to, grow, they're like, oh man, I've been doing this for a long time, and this is how I want to harness this action and this energy I have. So it's all about identifying what their energies are, their passion is, and finding out some kind of way to where they can do this and not do anything illegal. Because 9 times out of 10, their passion is something that they really can do. You just got to be creative about how they go about doing it.
And I commend you on that, and I guess we need to do a better job of supporting them.
We do.
And I don't know how, I think there's a number of ways to do it. I think sometimes we put a lot of responsibility on the schools, but I think at the same time organizations and churches, organizations, or whatever, we're going to have to go back and rethink this. Because, and I say that because kids want to have a safe haven, and at the same time, everybody don't want to play sports. And we got to get people to understand it's cool to be other things.
Right. What's your passion outside of sports?
Right.
You can multitask. You can do multiple things. Just because you play a sport, I mean you can't also do this. So you got to have multiple interests.
And I think that's very important because I realize a lot of kids put a lot of emphasis on sports and they don't have a backup plan.
Right.
And then they don't have a backup plan. I was at a college football game the other night, and I thought about it. I said, you got all them linemen out there, and half of them are not going to go
to the league.
pro. So what's going to happen to them? What is their fallback?
Right.
Are they going to become truck drivers? Are they going to become policemen? Are they going to become teachers? Are they planning for the next alternative?
And I do think, I mean, this is a whole different discussion. We
Sure.
probably won't be able to dive into it tonight. I do think that there needs to be also a shift, or at least avenues opened up for technical training, vocational training, because a lot of people, for whatever reasons, have started to look down on these skills of trade, because at the end of the day, everybody needs a skill. And college isn't for everybody. And I actually think that it's kind of being overvalued in today's time, to be quite honest with you. But again, it's identifying a skill or passion that you can use and leverage to actually make money and be a positive influence in your community. So I just think the mindset just needs to change.
Okay, so what you're saying is, and I agree with you, that we need to change the mindset, whereas a person that has a trade can make a lot of money. Some of them
be
can make
successful.
More, some of them can be successful, and guess what? You might be in less debt.
Well, guess what? They will not be in, they won't be in debt like that. It will be in way less debt.
And so I just think, like you said, we just have to give people the opportunities. Time is just flying, so I have about a few more minutes, and what I'm going to do for the few more minutes, I'm going to let you articulate some of the things that you think that the audience out there should be aware of, or some of the things that we should do. We talked about, I thought it was very important because we talked about AI.
Mhm.
And I think that my audience, a lot of them, some of them may know and not know, but may understand it a little better.
Right.
So that was important. I think that businesses, small mom and pops, have to think about, okay, we got to protect our data. Maybe they didn't think about it. Because you go in there and you give them a little card and they buy you little potato chips and your Mountain Dew and your stuff of that nature. So I think that we have to look at it from the big picture. And like you said, I believe at this point, like you said, there's kids have all kinds of passions.
Absolutely.
But they just need to be exposed or encouraged. Because I think if they are exposed and they're encouraged, I think they will go a long way. And I think the problem is that so long we've always told our young people, we set a bar this way, if they didn't reach the bar, we were always negative. And I think at this point we got to be positive. We have to be positive to our community, to our young people, and our young people be respectful to the older people, and that we should work together. So what do you...
Well, there are two group of folks in particular that you know has a sweet spot for me, and that's the elderly generation and the young folks.
Okay.
Someone told me that was old. He said, you know, if you're lucky, you will get old, because growing old is a skill. And he said that a lot of times people forget that they're gonna get old, and you should want to get old, and you always want to take care of the older generation because they paved the way in so many ways that you have no idea about. So you always want to take care of them. And on the same token, you want to also kind of harness and foster the younger generation, because they're the ones who are going to have their whole life ahead of them, making, you know, decisions and how they're going to affect their community. You know, so again, I would just say, make sure you take care of the elders because they paved the way. They got old because they got skilled at it, and they know a lot of times what they're talking about. And at the same time, you want this younger generation to also grow old and foster and give back to the community as well. So I just think that there are just two different areas that, because a lot of people say, you know, look out for the elders and don't really care about the youth and vice versa. We can do both and achieve both at the same time. I just think that, especially in our community, in particular, a lot of times some people kind of get left behind, and we really shouldn't do that. We should really applaud people when they get old and take care of them and make sure that they have everything that they need. I just think that sometimes we kind of don't really do that or pay attention to them.
So I think that what you've said, I think we're going to leave you on that. Audience, I hope that this has not been a heavy conversation, but it's been an informational conversation. And before I close, I'll say it one more time. Those of you still got a half hour.
Got 30 minutes.
You got a half hour to get to the polls to do the right thing. So thank you. Hopefully this has been a very enjoyable, informational Did You Know? And these are the kinds of things that I want to do so that we can think about it. Because if you've never been exposed to it, then you may not even know it, that it exists. There's a lot of you that want to do podcasts. You can do a podcast. You can do it. Some of you want to sing. Some of you want to do whatever. It's okay. You can do it. And I think sometimes we need to give you a little bit more encouragement.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm a believer. I always have been. If you believe you can do it, shoot for it. Because that's the most important thing, because even if you don't make it, but you try. And you define where you want to go and how you want to get there. So, audience, we need to be supportive of each other. We need to be supportive of our community. Because if we don't, who will? Thank you and good night.
Thank you for joining the Richard Utley Show on The Voice 17104. We will be here on The Voice 17104 every first and third Tuesday from 6:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. Once again, thanks for viewing. Remember to visit us on Facebook